well, good morning. It's lovely to see you all here. And I'm going to talk, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I did last year. Do say, by the way, if you can't hear me, I'm not going to use the mic for now, but if you can't hear, do say. The theme of the Being Human Festival last year was lost and found. And that was very exciting to me when the brief came through, because I'd recently rediscovered a lost theatre on the grounds of the university where I work, which is the University of Westminster. And I've been researching that theatre's history for some time. I was actually just finishing a book about it, so it seemed too good to be true, really, if Lost and Found would be the theme. The theatre in question was the Soho Theatre, which some of you, I'm sure, will know, will have heard of. It was actually founded in 1968 by Fred Proud and Verity Bargate, the original artistic directors. And in 1972, it moved into a tiny subterranean venue on Ridinghouse Street, owned by the then Polytechnic of Central London, which became, of course, the Westminster, the University of Westminster. And here it quickly became known as Soho Poly, so it took the word Poly from Polytechnic, and it became known as the Soho Poly. And it went on to become one of the most important fixtures on the London fringe and alternative theatre scene through the 70s and the 80s. This is the frontage of it in sort of the mid-70s, and this is another photo of the outside. I think those productions dated from about 1973, and this, you can see just how subterranean it was. It was really one of these tiny sort of Fitzrovia basements. It helped launch the careers of actors like actors, directors and writers, such as Nigel Hawthorne, Simon Callow, Bob Hoskins. We've got Bob Hoskins there. This is him in this tiny basement in 1977 in an autobiographical piece, a play that he wrote that he was so sort of anxious about that he used a pseudonym for that play. It was also where a lot of important feminist writers of the period, like Carol Churchill, Pam Gems, Tim Blake Worton Baker, where they had some of their first theatrical work. In 1990, the Soho Theatre moved over to Dean Street. It was kicked out of the Soho Theatre, effectively, Soho Poly basement, and it was itinerant for a while, and then it moved into its venue in Dean Street, as some of you will be familiar with. But the original basement was abandoned, and if you look at this picture, this is the state that it was in when we found it, where we found it in about 2012. A junk room, absolutely impossible to recognise as a theatre, and it had been left like that for about 25 years. And we went in there, and that's actually Fred Proud, that's the original artistic director, revisiting the old space. Both of which you can't see there, we're coughing our lungs up with the dust. So for last year's festival, my colleague Guy Osborne and I just wanted to find a way to start telling this story, bringing this history to light. Perhaps more importantly, in light of Being Human's remit, we also wanted to show how the academic research into the history of that theatre could provoke new thinking about the role of the arts and culture in society today. We also had slightly more devious reasons for wanting to be involved with the festival, which I'll admit to at the end of this talk. So in the end, our contribution to the Being Human Festival consisted of a week-long programme of events. We had all taking place in the original venue. We had an exhibition of rare theatrical photographs. That's one of them, of course. We had live poetry. We had a talk by the theatre's first artistic director, Fred Proud. This is Fred Proud back in the venue, sort of 45 years later. That's not a very good photo, I'm afraid, but that's the slightly sort of improved decor of the basement. We repainted the walls. And in fact, this is Fred Proud in his heyday. Yes, that's 1970. So perhaps, as well as these events, I'll just leave that up.
your logo for the festival.
Yeah. we actually took a photo of him striking that pose. I didn't bring it today. We've got a photo of sort of that pose 45 years later. But perhaps most significantly of all, we commissioned 2 pieces of theatrical performance. We call it sort of digital theatre, actually. I'll explain a bit more of that a bit later. But 2 brand new commissions, which we presented during that week. And all events were put on in the afternoon, quite specifically between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. Now, what I wanted to do this morning, just briefly of course, is to explain how we came to these decisions. The point I want to try and make in doing so is that the format of these events wasn't something that we imposed on top of the content at our disposal. But on the contrary, the way we chose to frame or display that content was itself derived from the research. And my suggestion, if you like, is that the best method for generating creative formats is to really drill down, to use an off-the-moment expression, to drill down into your individual areas of research and to see what that process of excavation might yield. So, to unpack that a little bit, in my research into the Soho Poly, I've become particularly interested in 2 ideas, and in how those ideas impacted both aesthetically and politically on the work that was being produced. There was an idea about time, and there was an idea about space, and of course those 2 are interrelated. So as far as time was concerned, the most significant fact about the early Soho theatre was that it was a pioneer of lunchtime theatre. These were plays of under an hour that were performed as you munched your sandwiches or slurped your soup. I use those 2 examples specifically because soup and sandwiches were what was served up in the Soho Poly basement. It was a little hatch and you went and you got your cup of soup. There were a number of reasons for this blossoming of lunchtime theatre. And one of the most interesting was that it expressed quite a radical belief in the value of disrupting the working day. Whilst conventional evening performances contributed to a sort of prescribed demarcation of work and leisure time, the lunchtime companies proved that the enjoyment of the arts could be something that you could bring into the heart of the working day. By shaking things up in that way, the lunchtime companies hoped that they could challenge other entrenched patterns of thought and behaviour. So I mentioned that our events took place between 1 and 2:30 in the afternoon. Roughly lunchtime, notional lunchtime. And of course, in a very straightforward way, that was intended to honour the Soho Poly's artistic practice. But we weren't simply mimicking or describing. By producing our own events at this time, we were also enacting the theatre's original methodology. Our events, we hoped, might be disruptive in similar ways, and part of our goal was to challenge the expectations of what a fulfilling working day might feel like. As an aside, it might be worth mentioning that there was also a sense in which visitors to our events were not merely witnessing the results of a research project, but were also participants in a series of ongoing practice-led experiments. That's something I'll touch back towards the end of today. So time and space also impacted on the Soho Poly in other crucial ways. The lunchtime slot meant that plays had to be less than an hour in length. And since there weren't that many brilliant one-act plays around at the time, this led to fascinating interactions with other media. Shorter radio and television plays were often adapted for the lunchtime stages, with directors having to find solutions to the challenges of multiple spatial locations and time frames that are particular to those storytelling forms. So this history of innovation and cross-pollination was also to find an expression in our design of the Being Human events. In particular, when it came to those performative elements that I mentioned at the beginning. So what we decided early on was that what we didn't want to do was just revive a couple of old plays and put them on. We keep a bit quiet about that because we're doing Being Human this year again. It's sort of art different reasons, but we didn't want to do it that way around. What we instead decided to do was to ask the question of what today's writers, or how today's writers, might meet the challenges posed by our contemporary ideas of space and time, and how they might engage with 21st century media technologies, things like smartphones, virtual reality, live streaming, and so on. And to explore those questions, we collaborated with a group called Hannah Bruce and Company. I'm sure the virtues of collaboration will become a theme of what people are talking about today. Hannah Bruce and Company use app-based technology and binaural sound to create immersive theatrical experiences. You're probably very familiar with this, but in case you're not, binaural sound is kind of what you might understand as three-dimensional sound. So something is recorded, when you're hearing it on headphones, you experience the spatial relationships which map directly onto how they were produced. So if a cut was dropped behind you, you'd hear it behind you. And what they did for our festival was that they wrote and recorded 2 experimental audio sketches. In the first of those pieces, audience members listened via headphones to a recording of a dancer moving in the space that participants were standing in at that time. So we wanted to describe the space, but rather than simply kind of doing that by writing about it or showing people, we thought that a dancer describing the space through movement would be an interesting and unusual way of approaching it. And in the second piece, two characters that you can hear but can't see discuss an emotional breakdown. In both cases, the work exploited the ways in which new technologies can overlay spaces with other virtual environments and play tricks with our sense of place, time, and liveness. So a little in the way that theatre companies in 1970 were having to adapt their practice to the intervention of television and radio. We wanted to do something that was responding in a contemporary way to new technologies. So here were 2 ways in which our research into the Soho Poly informed our choice of format. In the first instance, our decision to run events at lunchtime spoke directly to the theatre's history, whilst also reenacting some of its aesthetic and political ambitions. And in the second, the artistic brief that we gave to Hannah Bruce and Company derived from the discovery of the material circumstances of some of those earlier productions. Over the week, we also had some more conventional elements, if you like. We put on the display of theatrical photographs, like this one of Fred. But even this did double work, because the original Soho Poly foyer had itself functioned as an exhibition space. So here too, we were not merely describing the old theatre, but reactivating, in a sense, reviving it. I'll mention, just to sort of round up, just coming back to that point, that in certain respects, what we were doing was a new piece of practice-led research, or at least edging towards that kind of thing. And I'll just widen it briefly, because I think one of the most important elements of being human is the way in which its projects can fit into larger research narratives. I think that's worth everyone thinking about at the earliest opportunity. Think about it very strategically. Asking yourself how your projects might bring new focus to existing work, and also how it might generate new avenues for further research along the line. So I haven't told you what my devious reasons were for doing it. I'll hold that thought. If there's time in the panel, Michael can push me on that. But thanks very much for listening. That was our project.
Very intriguing. Okay, so we'll take questions at the end and move straight on to Cynthia Johnson, who's going to be talking about finding Mr. Hart.
Hello, welcome. I'm from here, from the Institute of English Studies, which is just upstairs at SAS. For the past 5 years, I've been working with the Blackburn Museum and Art Gallery on a little-known collection of manuscripts, rare books, and coins. Very briefly, the collections belong to this man, Robert Everett Hart, who made his vast fortune by supplying ropes to the cotton industry during the Industrial Revolution. There it is in all its glory. Not that there's a cultural agenda as well as that sort of campanile chimneys, anyway. So the ropes brought in power from an outside source, coal or water, and activated these looms. So his collections are, quite frankly, absolutely jaw-dropping, and they were really they were really hidden. They were lost and they needed to be found. So his medieval manuscripts are extremely important. They're really stunningly beautiful. His rare book collection as well is really something else. This is a copy of the fourth folio of Shakespeare, so that there are hardly any of those. Well, there are quite a few, I suppose, generally that survive. But the fourth folio are incredible because these were produced during the Great Fire of London, and many of them went up in smoke. So exciting. The intellectual scope of the collection, it follows the whole arc of the development of book history. So he begins with cuneiform tablets from circa 2000 BC, and it goes right the way up through William Morris's Kelmscott Press, which was produced contemporaneously with Hart's lifetime. The coins also deserve mention. Hart's is the only complete run of Roman imperial coins in the world outside of that held by the British Museum. And there's actually one item in the collection that there's only one other one in the world, and that's in the BM, and they weren't that pleased, you know. Unanticipated results. So it's quite good stuff. So it's you know, in terms of stuff to work with, it's very appealing and really not very challenging. Hart himself is he's an enigmatic figure. He presents himself very, very formally in the archival material that he left with his collections. He even included his school reports and stuff. Good job in that. He left his collections to the people of the town in Blackburn in 1946. Further research has shown that he represented himself differently elsewhere, as in this shadow portrait, which is from a trip he took to Milan in 1906. And we played with this variously too in different events that we've held. This was our conference poster, which was really quite fun. Anyway, Our Being Human event explored this enigmatic self-presentation through a play which was written by my very talented colleague Christopher Adams at the Institute of English Studies here in SANS. The crux of the problem faced by the Blackburn Museum, and I assume some of you are working with museums, and especially regional museums like Blackburn, is communicating the cultural value of the collections to the outside world. And I found that through traditional engagement activities, like exhibitions and lectures, I could connect with the usual suspects. But it was, well, for example, this Cotton to Gold was an exhibition I did a few years ago for 2 Temple Place. It attracted 34,000 people in London, so that's great. And, you know, it got in all the sort of, you know, national newspapers, etc. I was on the front row, so that was really exciting. But that said, it, you know, it didn't really do the job. And I'll mention also that if any of you are thinking of moving your Being Human projects forward into, you know, something even bigger, get a hold of 2 Temple Place, because they are actively looking for academics who have never curated a major London show. That's what they're about, bringing collections, things from outside this sort of, you know, metropolitan area into London and and help them preserve material. Anyway, so it's the people of the town, the people who were meant to be the beneficiaries of Hart's original bequest, that it just eluded me. So being here means seeing the perfect chance to present Hart to a local audience in a non-traditional format. But I want to stress here, and this is perhaps my most important point, in that engaging with institutions like the Blackburn Museum with a project like this is only achievable, I think, through a slow build-up of a relationship. So through the various exhibitions and lectures, you know, over a few years, I've meant to build up a relationship based on trust. So the success of the collaborations between us led us to, you know, bigger projects. We got an ACE resilience grant for £58,000, which enabled the museum to do catalog the collections and also to set up this research room, which was really important for them. I mean, you go to, as a researcher, to look at the objects, and there just wasn't any place to put anything. You know, you couldn't safely get them out. I put in a successful bid to the Paul Mellon Foundation for a major exhibition which will open next year in 2019. And we established an academic partnership with the Blackburn Council. I know, council. Sorry. Anyway, so this relationship is a slow build. It's based on mutual trust. And that's a really good thing, because the project that we proposed to them was this play about Hart, his family, his life, about Blackburn itself, to be performed in this building. And this is the derelict cotton exchange in the center of the town. It was built in 1856, and then it went on to be a cinema for quite some time, and it's been empty for the past 10 years. So it looks like this on the inside. And so there's one light socket, no heat, no lose, and much of the building was sort of roped off as being dangerous for human consumption. But we were all keen, we all wanted to do it. The actors and the director were thrilled with Chris's material. The present owners of the building were really excited about, you know, using it, and the museum were totally behind the project. So the museum sorted out a lot of the outreach for us, and publicity. We borrowed stuff from sort of rummage rescuers and places like that in the town. So we borrowed costumes, lighting, etc. So on the night, it's a freezing November night. We served everyone tea on arrival. That was a last-minute addition. That really and the play was performed in a promenade. Did I mention there are no seats? Yeah, that's Gussie looking very, very cold. So we had a packed house. We had 70 people. We sold out. And many of the audience were not the sort of usual supporters of the activities of the museum. So we succeeded. We succeeded in telling Hart's story to the people of his town, and also told them what was, you know, waiting for them to see in the museum. We had a reception after the event in the museum, which is just across the road from the museum, so that was an easy connect. And there was all the stuff. It's on permanent display, so they could actually see it. The evaluation forms confirm what we thought about the reception of the event. It was really true public engagement with a public that was surprised and fascinated by the story that they heard. There was pride for the town as the holder of the collections of such extraordinary power, as well as pride in the history of the place, pride in the history of the cotton industry, and in Blackburn as the most successful of those regional towns. So some comments mentioned that Blackburn usually gets a bad press, and that there were lots of stories to be told, many different voices to be heard amongst that crowd. Our audience was composed of school children, town councillors, local historians, artists, and just people who just rocked up, who saw that it was open and it was snowing, so they just came in. So for me, and this is my second takeaway point, read best practice, is that I actually felt that I had achieved something tangible in participating in being human. We delivered, via Christopher's superb writing, Hart's imperative, which is a gift to the people of the town. And I don't think it's often in academia that I think you witness the impact of your work. And this was an unanticipated pleasure. So I gained from discussing Hart and the history of the town with the audience after the performance, but mostly I was just astonished to see Hart and his collections as a subject of animated conversations all around me. So you could sort of feel it permeating. And I can honestly say that I consider this event to be one of the highlights of my career. So we're really going to have a good time. But when you're slogging away on your Being Human event, and there's no denying that Being Human events take an extraordinary amount of commitment and associated toil, especially with regard to publicity and networking. I mean, you really have to put in the time. But I implore you to think of your goal, not just for the research that you're communicating, but for you, yourself, as a communicator. Because for Being Human, I found that I was experiencing a nuance of being a human as well. As a researcher, a lecturer, an academic person in direct communication with other humans, I found myself becoming part of the story of the town, in retelling a forgotten one of its many forgotten stories. Perhaps my favorite interaction came through a part of a phoning program I did with BBC Radio Lancashire. A woman phoned in to say that she remembered seeing Mr. Hart when she was a very tiny girl being taken to school by her mother. And that her mother used to say, "That's Mr. Hart, and he's a very nice man." So these connectivities, these wrinkles in time were for me, and maybe for you, the unexpected return of the Being Human experience. Thank you.